And they eat about 17% of their energy in the form of saturated fat from coconuts, so they've got a decent saturated fat intake just to keep the cardiologists confused. So despite having lots and lots of food to eat, and it was well documented by the focus group that the food's rotting in the streets or being eaten by dogs, they have got absolutely no issue at all in the 40 to 60 age range. There's no one with a BMI of over 25. And the fat reporter hormone, the leptin, and these are logarithmic scales, this is sort of a 10-fold change for every chart, is in a completely different population. Their energy homeostasis is, their whole system is working differently to even healthy Westerners. Their other metabolic markers are also substantially better. You've got fasting blood glucose, plasma glucose here, and they're in a different population. This is Swedes, the average. And here, these are a number of standard deviations above or below the Swedish average. And you can see that leptin, glucose, insulin, factors involved in blood clotting are much lower. Because they're eating a high carbohydrate diet, perhaps not surprisingly, their triglycerides and HDL look as bad as or worse than Westerners, which might be kind of informative because no one's really ever been able to document any cardiovascular disease or stroke on this island. And Western doctors have been there for long enough. The island's got a population of about 12,000 in the 1960s. There's been plenty of opportunity for people to come forward, for doctors to spot this. And this is in common with what used to be reported in Africa before the adoption of Western foods, grains and whatnot, where if you looked at the actual evidence of heart attack in people at autopsy, you simply didn't find it up to the 1950s. Of course, recently there's been this paper out where they've done scans of mummies, including some mummified remains of some hunter-gatherers, and they did find some calcification, signs of atherosclerosis in the arteries, especially in the larger vessels, in quite a fair proportion of these mummies, which is kind of interesting because it echoes what they found when they started doing autopsies in Africa, and you did see fatty streaks, atheroma in some of the larger vessels. So it's a bit like what a stroke doctor I've spoken to says you'll see some people who've got heavily calcified arteries and then they've got a blockage, and you'll see other people who've had a stroke and they've got absolutely clean arteries all the way up to the point where the blockage is. So we still don't really understand how some of these physical characteristics of atherosclerosis necessarily correlate with the disease process that might kill you. So I'd still maintain that before Western lifestyle was adopted and Western diet, it was possible to live your whole life without ever getting symptoms of cardiovascular disease. The health of the cadavers, I mean, you immediately think, well, there must be something weird about these people. They've got some fantastic genetic protection. But people who are closely related from other parts of Papua New Guinea seem to have, if anything, maybe more susceptibility to overweight and stroke. This is a chap from New Ireland, and this gentleman's in Port Moresby on the mainland. So, and you see the same data on this fat reporter hormone. Now people are looking for it in other populations that haven't adopted Western lifestyle. These actually hunter-gatherers have got lower leptin than this is American distance runners. And even though these distance runners have actually got less fat tissue on them, they still don't have as low leptin as the hunter-gatherers. So this is not something that you can exercise the difference away. And again, the trends you'd expect in blood pressure, people who are living a westernized lifestyle have got far better blood pressure. It's interesting, even small changes towards westernization seem to alter some of these, the amount of fat, the insulin, the leptin levels. These are closely related to our hunter-gatherers from Ecuador, and one group is still living a traditional lifestyle, but the others have just started farming. They've got a bit of sugarcane going on, I believe, and with some of the Western changes, you're already starting to see differences. Similar things were seen in Solomon Islanders in the 1950s. Those that had more contact with Western traders and boats, they already, although they were looking at leptin at the time, they had increased blood pressure and waist measurements and the like. Which also calls into question what's our Western ideal of healthy is. If you've got no overt obesity, you probably still are in that higher Western population of leptin level and insulin levels. So a schematic that Stefan Lindbergh gives is that if you're a Westerner, even if you do all the things right to get your risk factor low, according to conventional wisdom, you're still nowhere near if you were living more like a hunter-gatherer or a pre-cereal farmer. And there are a lot of conditions that have been linked to insulin resistance, and this may be an important link. I always feel especially intrigued by the increased stature in early puberty, as I notice everyone who's young these days towering over me, and I used to be tall relatively when I was young, so and the data backs it up, we are getting taller and taller, and it may not be a good sign. So have a look now. Most theories of obesity seem to involve eating fat or carbohydrate at some point or the other. The whole field of which hunter-gatherers are healthy and what are they eating kind of throws a spanner in the works of that, because depending on the latitude you're at, a study that's gone into great detail looking at a large number of societies has found that the further north you are, the more you tend to eat meat and less carbohydrate, and the further south you are, the more likely you are to be eating a lot of root veg and starchy foods and less meat. And of course, the Catawbans are eating even more carbohydrate. The people who started farming, but farming root vegetables instead of cereals, are eating even more carbohydrate than that. And there don't seem to be any ostensible differences in the metabolic health of these peoples. Just a quick summary: the Catawbans, the Massachusetts, have got a lot of root veg going on, and we've got the opposite extreme with Kenyans back in the early parts of the 20th century in the Maasai eating a lot of high-fat milk and blood and meat and lots and lots of fish. Interesting point, modern Inuit still eat a lot of fish, but they have serious obesity issues and cardiovascular disease issues, so fish wasn't powerfully protected enough to stop that. And the Kung Bushmen from the Kalahari, I believe, they eat a lot of mongongo nuts at certain times of year, and they're legendarily high in fat. So the factor that seems to correlate with the encroachment of obesity in the population is when they start getting in the Western white goods of flour and sugar. And these guys here are eating maize tortilla, which I'm assured by some Mexican colleagues I've had over the years, the more authentic maize tortilla are just sort of crushed together grains of corn. They haven't been milled, a lot of them haven't. They're quite adamant about that. So there's a further processing again between the maize tortilla that they were eating then and the corn flour ones that people might eat now. And as soon as the flour is introduced, it really starts to take off. And when you throw in the processed food and the sugar and the bread and the cookies and everything, that's when you have a disaster on your hands. And so for the rest of us of European descent, regardless of whatever baseline leptin and insulin differences we've had, we didn't have an obesity epidemic until quite recently. So some of the recent changes that have gone on is that the carbohydrate intake has roughly bounced back to wherever it was before. But you can see because the levels of fiber are dropping, the carbohydrate that we're eating is different in that it's a lot more refined than it used to be. And this is a fun table charting an association between type 2 diabetes incidence and how much ready-to-eat cereals that people are eating. So I point the finger at the industrialization of food. As it says here, no country has embraced the movement towards commercialized prepackaged food as much as the United States. Americans eat 31% more packaged food than fresh food, and they consume more packaged food per person than their counterparts in nearly all other countries. You also got to bear in mind that as we're getting more time poor, we're resorting more to the processed foods just because people feel they don't have time for anything else. Given the fact also that the current belief in the dietary world, well, at least for a long time, was that fat was bad and you should reduce cholesterol. The processed foods tended to have the fat replaced with carbohydrate, and then because of the cost factor, because the high fructose corn syrup in the US and Canada is so cheap, and because it makes the food taste better, so people are more likely to buy your brand than the other brand if you put it in. The processed foods that people are eating are just a mass of very refined carbohydrate. So there are some clues from dieting that in order to lose weight, this is a trial where These guys were on not caloric restriction, of course. In order to lose weight on a low-fat diet, you have to enforce caloric restriction because, and this leads people to be hungry. That's a sign that the energy homeostasis system is still perturbed and that it's desperately trying to get you to put that weight back on, and that's why the word diet is a dirty word for most people, because it's about as much fun as, well, having your head kicked repeatedly. The fact that low-carbohydrate diets seem to cause weight loss without you having to have taken any conscious decision about how much you're eating is an indication that it's perturbing this energy homeostatic system less than a Western diet that's full of Western carbohydrate. And recently, some work from a group of Harvard's indicated that after successful weight loss, when you're trying to maintain that weight loss, a low-carbohydrate, a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet seems to cause a greater reduction in the energy expenditure, both in total and at rest, than a very low-carbohydrate diet. Again, consistent with, there's something about Western carbohydrate that's messing up that fat thermostat. So this is a bit of a puzzler. How come carbohydrate levels seem to have something to do with Western diet's problems, but be eaten as 70% of energy intake in really well mushed up high glycemic index root?